summer, warm up much and cool off little in the winter. Using these ideas, I encourage my students to earn the 1 extra point for a creative design. And I remind my students to title the 3 separate papers that you turn in an 8x11 key that numbers all of these. Then a poster-size street view 3-dimensional color that shows the house as you would see it when you were delivering the UPS. And then 2-dimensional black and white construction plans on a third paper, which is poster size. The construction plans are described in your packet for the solar house assignment. Are there any questions about that? Students who were here on Tuesday had much of the period to do this work in class. But all of you are off doing sleazy mad stuff, so you unfortunately will have to make that work on your own. Okay.
Wait, so 0 to February 4th is
The plans.
plans?
That's right.
All of the plans?
All 3. I mean the 2 plans and the key.
Okay.
Other questions about that? Then on Wednesday, which was yesterday, we went over the Unit 6 exam, which was the last unit exam in the previous semester. Since you were not here for that, I will host a lunch next week, date to be determined, where I will allow my students that are curious to come and see the Unit 6 exam. Are there any questions about that? Now we're caught up. So let's move on with Thursday. Last time we were in class, we were on assignment 7.1. And we were looking at that, not the IMAP assignment, not the IMAP notice. We were on this. You might remember that for study goal number 13, we were looking at America's energy budget. And then we started in number 14 by identifying the biggest targets for energy loss. You see that gray up there, the wasted energy. In America, the big wastes of energy are the transportation inefficiencies here, the electricity generation and transmission and inefficiencies there, industrial, commercial, and residential are relatively minor, but we can save energy there because people don't like wasting money when they don't have to. Look at how much energy we use in our residential applications. Most of that is heating and cooling, temperature control. And so that brings us to passive solar. We talked about this already. I gave you the basics. So I have a couple of pictures to show you which are just a couple days overdue. First is this very famous diagram, some 1970s design that was very common. If your parents are architects or engineers, they've probably seen this drawing. It's a really famous drawing. And it shows ways that you can make a more passive solar home, saving energy through some of these basic shenanigans that I've described here, like airflow, solar geometry, where you want the sunlight to come in and where you don't. Reflected natural lighting as an electricity saving. That's not technically passive solar, but you'll note the reflected sunlight up high. The thermal mass of that wall, which radiates heat. Once you get it cold, it stays cold. Once you get it hot, it stays hot. Here is the basics of the geometry. So when the summer sun is high, you shade the thermal mass, which is drawn in dark blue. Like right now. Most of you are not barefoot like me, but this floor is kind of cool. Hello. He's not here. See, this floor is kind of cool because there isn't any sunlight hitting us because of the orientation of our eaves. But trust my feet. That floor right there is much warmer because sunlight is hitting that sidewalk. If sunlight were hitting these floors, we'd have heat radiating into our space. But because of our solar geometry, we keep out the sun when we don't want to heat the space. Like that. You can see how much sunlight reaches the house because the neighbor's house is a little further away. You can see that the winter and summer lights enter or do not enter, respectively. You can see that the house is made so that hot air can rise, and seasonally you can let the hot air leave to draw cold air in from outside, which is number 6, convection currents. You might remember the guy that had the funny mustache, Amory Lovins, the Inspector Gadget looking dude. I think this building is either his personal house or maybe the office of the Earthwatch Institute or something. But it's a really famous structure. I've seen it photographed a whole bunch. I believe it's in Phoenix, Arizona, but you can probably Google this to confirm that. And this house is a really big whoop because it uses very, very little energy, and supposedly it feels perfect all year. Remember, thermal mass is like a tanker ship at sea. It's very difficult to give it a push. So thermal mass will stay roughly the same temperature all the time. When outside temperatures are very high, your thermal mass feels nice and cool relative to the high outside temperatures. And then when outside temperatures are crazy low, that thermal mass feels nice and warm. Because thermal mass has what's called thermal inertia. It's hard to heat it up, but it's hard to cool it down. So it'll just stay average. When outside temperature is above average, you find a cooler average inside. And when outside temperature is below average, you find a nice warm house inside. Thermal mass has thermal inertia, like a giant tanker ship at sea. So adobe is really common in the desert. To avoid the extreme high and the extreme low, people build their houses out of basically lumps of compressed sand and rock. Because it just keeps your house middling instead of extremes.
What is that?
Yeah, bro.
Do like fireplaces count?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to make fireplaces that have so much stone and hearth, but the whole point is by heating up all that stone and hearthware, then it's a giant lump of heat in your house that radiates to warm the house.
Is that like an efficient thing to do though?
Well, first of all, let me remind you that a fireplace doesn't count as passive solar because you still have to add fuel. So the fireplace itself, when you have a fire, is not passive solar. But a principle of passive solar is thermal mass, and fireplaces take advantage of that principle. Once you heat up the fireplace, the fire goes out, but in the morning it still feels kind of warm next to it. And then at the end of assignment 7.1, there's the warm-up that you missed a couple days ago. What is micropower? That is micropower. Small scale, short distance electricity and heat generation. That's a really annoying buzzer. Microgeneration is any way of making your own electricity or your own heat. Either as a neighborhood, maybe as a couple of homes, or most specifically as a single house. Some of these you've seen a lot. Some of you probably have in your homes. For example, small-scale water heating. Does anybody have solar water panels? You might have them for a pool if you have a pool in your house. In my house on West Camino Cielo, my water came out of a well. When the water comes out of the well, it splits into two pipes. One of them is cold water delivered to my house, so when I turn on the cold water, there's cold water. The other pipe goes into a bunch of these, so that the water is pushed between this sandwich of glass to another sandwich of glass, and then into my flash heater. So when I go inside and I turn on the hot water, the heater goes whoosh, and the water is heated up before it comes out of the faucet. But if the water comes in pretty hot already, I don't have to use very much gas to get it the extra couple degrees to really hot. So a lot of these solar water heaters are used for bumping the temperature, like preheating or partial heating. Sometimes, you don't want to go spray the car with like freezing water because it gets chilly to wash your car. So car washes will use these. It's like, hey, we don't have to spend any money on it, but at least the water's not freezing cold when people come to wash their car. And when we talk about solar panels, most of you think of these, which are called photovoltaic or PV panels. Light into electricity, photovoltaic. How many of you have photovoltaic panels in your house? See, these are becoming more and more common because we live in the great state of California. Do your parents own that home? So Westmont figured out that if they put in those solar panels, they get a tax break, a big old tax break. Because in this great state of California, we have diverted some of our tax dollars to encourage more of these. A lot of people get angry about giving away tax dollars to citizens to do stuff like this, but remember that saves tax dollars somewhere else. The state doesn't have to manage the electricity supply to that percentage of Westmont, because Westmont is that percentage off the grid. And that percentage of California's electricity doesn't produce air pollution, doesn't cause global warming, and so California saves money elsewhere, so it's like a little kickback. Like, hey, look, you help us save money on energy, we'll give you some of your tax dollars back. You can even make them really little. Most of you think of wind power as large scale because if you drive to Palm Springs, you see the giant field of these, or if you drive up to Mammoth, you see the big old field in Mojave, Tehachapi. But you can do these in small scale too. Back when Jane Fonda owned a ranch across the street from my pad in the mountains, she put up one of these to provide electricity to what is now called Laurel Springs Ranch. Anybody know Laurel Springs up there? It's like a yoga retreat now. So she had one of these just for her house. And these are becoming micro power in a bunch of agricultural communities. Do you guys know that there's rules about where farmers can grow food? So like if there's been a diesel spill on this chunk of dirt, the farmer can't grow food on this chunk of dirt. So they go, hey neighbor, hey neighbor, hey neighbor, if we all pitch in 15 grand, we can put up a $60,000 wind turbine, and then we don't have to pay for electricity ever again. In 10 or 15 years, it's paid for itself, and from then on, we get our electricity for free. So there's these like neighborhood electrical co-ops in a lot of agricultural communities where you use little chunks of free dirt to make like a 1 to 5 household electrical supply. Yeah.
So small scale is then just like one or a few, and large scale is like lots.
Yeah, that's right. I want to remind you that micropower doesn't have to be for one house or one occupant. Usually that's kind of for a cluster. Even the electrical panels on his roof at Westmont, usually the extra electricity is used up by his neighbors. So when he's producing more than he needs, technically he sells that back to Edison and they give him a credit. So at night when he has to ask Edison for electricity, they just reset some of that credit backward.
Actually, the whole neighborhood is split.
Fine. So a couple of neighborhoods nearby, so instead of the house, it's the other. And this drawing is bogus, but it reminds me to tell you a story. You guys notice that's bogus, right? You see that it's bogus? It's supposed to be small-scale hydropower, but it doesn't work like that. Small-scale hydropower is little tiny bits of electricity as water moves downhill. I was swimming in a river up in Northern California on the Trinity River. And I was in my homie's backyard up there, and I thought a plane crashed in the river. So I come out of the river, and I'm like, bro, dude, plane crashed in your river. We got to go. And he's like, no. Relax. Go look more closely. And it was hard to look because it was like a really rapid riffle, so I had to like get in position, and I swim out, and I hold onto a rock, and I look over, and he's right. What I thought was the turbine of an airplane was actually a very small hydroelectric turbine that was chained and anchored to the bottom of the river. As the water flow goes through that turbine, it spins the whatchamajiggy that spins the magnets inside the copper coil. Remember I told you about how all turbines are the same idea, where you spin the thing and then it makes electricity? You guys remember that? Like this? We did this, right?
Yeah.
So this thing is spinning this thing, which is making this thing. And so electricity comes out and goes up to shore and makes that guy's house have electricity. His neighbor. They had a really remote place that they couldn't reach electricity to. Now technically, this one didn't work out very well because the Trinity River is really wild every now and then. So when there's gnarly years, like tan oaks and redwoods and boulders come crushing down the river. And so his thing got all chingered up and they had to get rid of it. But the idea is, you might live in one of these places where you can catch some wind or catch some sunlight or catch some river flow or catch some biomass, which is still humanity's primary source of energy. Everybody talks about the fossil fuel thing and the global warming and coal and petroleum and natural gas, but please don't forget that for humanity with a capital H, the number one source of energy is still biofuel, either burning wood, agricultural debris, brush. And technically, we consider biomass any energy source that is made from current carbon. So when you put trash in the landfill and that bubbles out methane, that's considered biomass energy. The landfill is the energy generator, and it gives you methane that you can burn. So check this out. Some parts of the United States, they live close to the lumber industry. That's the Northwest. Or to agriculture. That's the middle. Look at Los Angeles County. They're in red because they have a lot of landfills. So they can make a lot of biomethane. Kind of neat, right? Yeah.
Is that like the tidal power system?
Not exactly, no. But you can modify that concept for tidal power. It's still hydropower.
Okay, so that's just like, what's that one called?
I think it's called submersible riparian hydropower. So you can put it underwater. Yeah, it's not a vocab. Okay, but I don't want to talk about this all day. Anybody have any questions on 7.1? Other questions, I mean, on 7.1? Because I want to move on to 7.3. Questions? What? It's a roller. Like people use it for like massage rolling. But my legs are like totally ruined because I charged a little too hard this weekend and I've been on the couch pretty hard for like 3 months now. So going straight from off the couch to like marathon weekend has been, I'm old. I drink too much. I don't eat right. I don't get enough exercise. I'm old. Coming off the couch. Stop making fun. Don't judge me. Okay. Vocab on 7.3.
Coal bed methane.
Is methane that's often found in coal deposits. So usually it's a waste product and it's a hazard because when you're mining you don't want to make any sparks and light all that natural gas on fire. But in beds of coal you often find little pockets of natural gas. Methane. Yes?
Fractional distillation.
We will do as a study goal. Next. What? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Try it. Depositional basin. We may be able to do today. If not, we'll do tomorrow in lecture. But thanks for trying. What else? Anywhere that far off.
What is reclamation?
What is what?
It says in 25, it says what's this extract or line demonstrate about reclamation?
As a study goal we shall do. Anybody else? Okay. So let's get to these study goals. Number 17 is about peak oil. I hope we get past this one today, but this might be our only study goal in 7.3. Make sure you keep track of where we leave off in case I don't make it to the next study goal. But I got to make sure that everybody here speaks politics first. You've heard that people debate peak oil, I think, right? Have you guys, how many of you are aware of this concept from life? So, just to be clear, there is this moment where petroleum starts to run out. It's like, look, I can make more, I can make more, I can make more, I can make more. And it's like, uh-oh. We ain't got as much, we ain't got as much, we ain't got as much. We're running out. Hot dang. All out. That moment where global production of petroleum is maximum and then starts to drop off, that moment is called peak oil. Like the peak of a mountain, where global production goes up until it starts to go down, and then that moment is called the peak. I hope you guys realize this is a political issue. If I want you to invest in my petroleum company, I say, peak oil's in the future, man. There's profit to be had. Give us all your money, buy a gasoline car, keep investing in Shell, BP, Mobil, whatever, Exxon. Because petroleum is the future. There's plenty left. Does that make sense to everybody? There's a benefit to one group if you believe peak oil's in the future. On the other side of this political debate is the hippie liberal whiners like me that say, no, 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 no. Petroleum is the past. No more giant pipelines across the United States. No more drilling my Santa Barbara coastline. We should wean ourselves from petroleum because it's starting to run out. Some of us even say it's been running out. And you understand that there is a separate constituency that benefits from making peak oil either an immediate problem or a past tense problem. Does that make sense to everybody? It's a politicized issue. The part I gotta tell you is they're both kind of right and they're both kind of wrong. And this is a really tricky, fine detail that makes a huge difference in how you understand global fossil fuels. This is not a stupid detail. I'm not just rambling for my politic. This is a really important thing for you to know. Watch this. Some people say peak oil happened in the 1970s. And some people say peak oil happened sometime in August of the year 2009. And some people say peak oil is way out in the future. And the funny thing is, all three of those groups are right. Now watch. This is the detail that splits the kids who got it from the kids who didn't. Globally, the total production of petroleum continues to rise. It's 2014, and we're still getting more petroleum this week than we did last week, than the week before, than the week before, than the week before. So in total global petroleum production, we still haven't hit peak oil. Everybody clear on that? Well, now comes the fine detail. We're working harder to find the last of it. Remember how I told you that global supplies of seafood have kept going up, even though most of the seafood's running out? It's like, oh, now you got to dig for the really hard to get stuff that's lower quality, that's really in the middle of nowhere, that takes a whole bunch of effort. That's what petroleum is doing. We'll discuss this later as a study goal, so let me just give you the basic punchline now. The easy petroleum, the kind that comes squirting out of the ground when you make a hole. Anybody seen There Will Be Blood? Where Daniel Day-Lewis is all young with his handsome mustache and he's in a little hole and he's like chipping away at rocks. And are you swooning right there, or is that just moving? Okay. So there's this like pickaxe and he's like underground and he's in a little, and he goes crack, 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 and he like runs out and he goes shoots up into the air. And maybe you haven't seen that movie, but you've seen like old black and white footage of people in Texas with a big old cowboy hat. And it's all like stilting motion animation, and then the little rig explodes and all the petroleum shoots up into the air, and they all take their cowboy hats and they throw them off, and they go, "Yee-haw!" And they say, "My grandson will be president, and my great-grandson too." That type of petroleum that comes out on its own, under its own pressure, like popping a zit, that kind of petroleum has basically run out. That did peak a long time ago. The easy stuff that you don't have to work for, there's a couple of those deposits left, I'm sure, but not very many. That used to be our only petroleum supply. All the petroleum on the planet, you would just go chip, 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 and then it would go squirting, you just catch it in a funnel and put it in a barrel, and it's easy. That's definitely on the steep decline, right around zero. There's a few left, but not many of those deposits. That's almost done. That peaked a long time ago. That's true. But global supply kept going because if this is under pressure and I take the cap off, it goes poof, and we get a lot of free stuff. But when we get the free stuff, there's still some things left in there, right? If you couldn't just tip that over, how would you get that out? Yeah, I mean, you could find another way to add pressure. So everybody thinks that the straws, where you see the thing going like this, that that's sucking out petroleum. Did you guys know that that's not actually sucking out petroleum, that there's two straws? How could you get it out of two straws if you can't suck it out? Yeah, you blow into one of them so that builds pressure and squirts the petroleum out of the second straw. Do you guys know that? Okay, so that type of petroleum extraction, that type is in the distant past. Distant past. That type, where you have to add pressure to get stuff out, that's how our oil rigs work here inside of our channel. That's how most of the on-land, like the Mesa used to do a bunch of that. That stuff probably has started to taper off now. For most of the currently available petroleum, that probably did peak in 2009. But globally, we're still getting more. Because now there are new methods of extracting petroleum. The secret is they're just really energy intensive. Now we dig up rocks that have little stains of petroleum, and we crush those rocks and we cook those rocks, like a crack cocaine metaphor. We cook those rocks, and that melts out the last little bit of petroleum in the rocks, and then we can take that out. That's how we're raising global production now. The current part, the rise in global productivity, is in really energy-intensive extraction. So sure, we can keep getting more petroleum, but we got to work harder and harder for it. It costs more money to get it, so the price is going up. And it takes more energy to get it, so the carbon cost of petroleum is going up. You understand what I mean by this? Yeah?
Sorry, now you just make it it's not going on for content.
It depends how you ask the question. The total number of gallons available to humanity keeps growing. But now it's growing because we've brought on this new type of petroleum business, which is really expensive and really dirty. What's already dropped off a long time ago is the free stuff like popping zits that comes out of the ground on its own. And what's also started to drop off is secondary extraction, where you have to add pressure to get petroleum off. That's already been tapering. It's been tapering for about 3 to 5 years, depending on who you ask. And we might be able to spike it up a little bit if we can drill in new places, but that's basically getting over with. So now, where we're seeing the growth in petroleum production globally, the way that we're getting more now per day, is because we're getting into really expensive and really dirty petroleum. That's what I mean that they're both right. It's like, yeah, we're not really running out. We can make more petroleum. But the hippies were right too. That, hold on a minute, the really easy stuff is over with. Now it's becoming more expensive and dirtier. It's hard being back at school, right? You're all making that face. See you tomorrow. Bring all your homework.